opening the wrong bedroom door is an embarrassing mistake. Falling asleep in it when the room belongs to Adrian Moretti, the most feared boss on the East Coast, is the kind of mistake people don't walk away from. But before Lily Bennett could even process where she was, the woman hand-picked to become Adrian's bride pushed open that door, looked straight at her, and went stone still. My name is Lily Bennett, and until about 6 hours ago, I was just the temporary maid the Moretti estate hired for one very long weekend. I took the job because Noah's tuition was 3 weeks late, and pretending otherwise wasn't going to make the numbers smaller. My brother is 16. He doesn't need to know our mother's insurance ran out before it ever really helped us. He definitely doesn't need to know I sold my last set of chef's knives. The ones I'd been saving since culinary school was still a plan and not a thing I'd quietly stopped mentioning just to cover this month's rent. So when the agency called about a 2-day placement at some private estate outside the city, I said yes before I even asked what it paid. I should have asked more questions. The Moretti house isn't a house. It's gold leaf and marble hallways and a chandelier in the entryway, bigger than my entire apartment. Every room smelled like fresh flowers and old money, the kind of quiet luxury that makes you instinctively lower your voice. The other staff talked about the family the way you talk about weather that might turn dangerous, carefully and only when necessary, and always with a glance over their shoulder first. Don't go near the West Wing, one of the older maids told me before my first shift, not looking up from the silver she was polishing. Don't make eye contact with Mr. Moretti if he's in the room, and whatever you do, don't touch anything in his private suite. I nodded along like I'd remember all of it. I intended to remember all of it, but intentions don't survive 18 straight hours on your feet, and by the time I hit hour 18, I couldn't have told you my own name, let alone which wing was which. The gathering that weekend was supposed to be enormous. Some kind of family event, the staff whispered, important enough that every surface in the house had to gleam. I cleaned 4 guest suites before lunch. I polished a dining table long enough to seat 30 people. I hauled floral arrangements up a marble staircase that seemed specifically designed to punish anyone wearing the cheap flats the agency issued us. My feet had stopped being feet somewhere around hour 12 and become 2 distant, throbbing complaints I was doing my best to ignore. By 1 in the morning, the house had gone quiet except for the hum of a few late staff finishing up somewhere far below me. My arms ached from carrying more linens than any one person should reasonably carry, and my vision had gone soft around the edges, the way it does when your body starts making decisions. Your brain hasn't approved yet. I was supposed to be heading to the 3rd floor staff quarters to drop off that stack of linens before I could finally sit down. Instead, I took a wrong turn. The east hallway looked exactly like the west one. Same marble, same gold sconces, same identical doors. Except somewhere in my exhausted fog, I convinced myself one of these rooms was an empty guest suite. I pushed open a heavy door. Dark wood, slightly ajar, expecting folded towels and a made bed I could collapse onto for exactly 5 minutes. What I found instead was a room that smelled like cedar and leather, and something expensive I didn't have a name for. Moonlight came through floor-to-ceiling windows and landed on a bed easily the size of my entire bedroom back home, draped in charcoal silk. No suit jackets thrown over chairs. No sign that anyone was using this room tonight. Just quiet and softness, and my legs making the decision before the rest of me caught up. 5 minutes, I told myself, easing my aching feet out of my shoes. Just 5 minutes off my feet, and then I'll find the linens. I didn't get 5 minutes. I didn't get the slow drift into sleep I was expecting either. No lost coherent thought, no gentle fade. 1 second I was sinking into that impossibly soft duvet, and the next there was nothing at all. I don't know what time Adrian Moretti came back to his own room that night. I don't know how long he stood in the doorway before he decided not to wake the exhausted stranger sprawled across his bed, still in her apron, 1 shoe on and 1 shoe off. I only know what I pieced together later, that he'd looked at me for a long moment, said nothing, and eventually lay down on the far side of the mattress instead of waking me, too tired himself, maybe, to deal with the inconvenience of a lost maid at that hour. What I woke up to was warmth where there shouldn't have been any, and weight against my side that hadn't been there when I closed my eyes. The room had gone from black to the pale grey of early morning. I blinked, my brain thick and slow, and it took several seconds to understand that the warmth was a person, and the person was Adrian Moretti, and I was very much still in his bed. I didn't move. I'd barely let myself breathe. My mind was already racing through excuses. I got lost. I only meant to rest my eyes. Please don't call anyone. Please don't fire me before I've even collected a single paycheck. When the heavy double doors of the suite swung open without warning. No knock, no pause. Like whoever was on the other side had every right in the world to walk in unannounced. Light flooded the room. Voices followed it, and standing in the doorway, dressed like she'd already won something, was a woman I'd never seen before, flanked by an older couple and an elegant, silver-haired woman who could only be Adrian's grandmother. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I felt the mattress shift as Adrian sat up beside me, entirely unbothered, like waking up next to a strange maid. Was an ordinary Tuesday. The woman in the doorway, poised, polished, exactly the kind of woman I imagined belonged in a house like this, looked at me the way you'd look at something that didn't add up. Her eyes moved from my wrinkled apron to my bare feet to the pillow I'd instinctively pulled against my chest, and something in her expression cracked open. Her voice, when it finally came, was quiet, too quiet. The way a held breath is quiet right before it isn't anymore. She didn't look at Adrian. She didn't look away from me either. The silver-haired grandmother beside her went very still, and somewhere behind them both, I heard someone's sharp, disbelieving inhale. Who? Is she? Adrian hasn't even opened his mouth yet, and Lily's ordinary life is already over. If you were in that bed, would you have run? Or stayed and let him lie? Drop stay in the comments if you think Lily should play along, or ruin if she should tell the truth before it's too late. Like this video if that cliffhanger got you, and follow the channel so you catch chapter 2 the moment it drops. Who is she? The woman's question hung in the air for exactly 1 second before the room exploded. Adrian. The older man beside her, his father, I'd guess, from the way everyone else's eyes flicked to him first, said the name like a warning. What is the meaning of this? Betrayal, the woman said, finding her voice again, and this time it wasn't quiet at all. That's what this is. I've spent 3 months preparing for this arrangement, 3 months of fittings and family dinners, and pretending your silence meant something other than contempt. And I walk in to find a maid in your bed. Her eyes cut to me like I was something spilled on the carpet. A maid. Isabella. Adrian started. Don't. She threw the word at him. Behind her, the grandmother's sharp eyes moved between the two of them with an expression I couldn't read. Somewhere between fury and fascination. A younger man in the doorway. An advisor, maybe, judging by the tablet clutched to his chest, was already murmuring urgently into a phone. 2 of the household staff had appeared behind the family. Drawn by the noise, and I watched their faces do the same thing mine must have been doing. The slow-motion realization that whatever was happening in this room was about to become very bad for everyone standing in it. One of them, a young man I recognized from the kitchen earlier that day, caught my eye for half a second before looking pointedly at the floor, as if not seeing me could undo whatever he'd just seen. Someone explained this immediately, Adrian's father said, or I will assume the worst. I opened my mouth. I had a whole explanation ready. The wrong turn, the exhaustion, 5 minutes that had gone catastrophically sideways. And none of it made it out before Adrian moved. He sat forward, entirely unhurried, like the room wasn't one wrong sentence away from catching fire. There's nothing to explain, he said. Isabella, I should have told you sooner. I apologize for the timing. He paused, and I felt the pause the way you feel, a held breath right before something breaks. This is Lily, my fiancée. The room went silent in a way that felt physical, like all the air had been pulled out of it at once. Every part of me froze, my hands on the pillow, my spine against the headboard, even the thought I'd been mid-sentence forming. Fiancé. He'd said fiancé. About me, to a room full of armed men and a woman in a designer dress who looked like she wanted to set the bed on fire with both of us still in it. Isabella's mouth opened and closed. "You're joking." "I don't joke," Adrian said, and something in his tone made even his father go quiet. The grandmother, I still didn't know her name, let out a small, sharp laugh that had no humor in it at all. Isabella turned on her heel without another word and walked out, her footsteps echoing down the marble hallway long after she'd disappeared. The advisor followed, still murmuring into his phone. Adrian's father stayed a moment longer, studying his son with an expression I couldn't decode, then left too, taking the rest of the room's tension with him and somehow leaving all of mine behind. The door clicked shut. It was just Adrian and me, and the ruins of whatever had almost happened. "You need to explain that," I said. "Right now." He got up, pulled on a shirt, and finally looked at me directly for longer than 3 seconds. "Isabella De Luca," he said, "was never a woman I chose. Her family runs a syndicate the size of mine. The engagement was arranged 8 months ago to unify our operations. Peace between 2 territories that have been at war for a decade. So call it off. Tell them the truth. I intercepted a message 2 days ago." His voice didn't change, but something underneath it did. The De Lucas aren't planning peace. They're planning to use the wedding to get every senior Moretti in one room and end this war permanently. My father. My grandmother. Me. I stared at him. "And you think announcing a fake fiancé fixes that?" "There's an old rule the De Lucas still respect. A prior engagement, if it's real enough to survive scrutiny, voids the arrangement without breaking the peace outright. It buys my family time to find out who's feeding them information before anyone else dies." He said it so plainly it took me a second to absorb the word dies. "Find someone else," I said. "I'm a maid. I clean guest rooms for a living. I'm not your fiancé. I'm not even your type. And in about 6 hours I'm supposed to be back at the agency picking up my next assignment. So whatever this is, it can't be me." "Don't do that," he said, quieter now. And something about his voice made me stop. "Do what?" "Talk about yourself like you don't belong in this conversation." He crossed the room, and I noticed he didn't come as close as I expected, close enough to make his point, not close enough to make me flinch. "I don't care what size you are. I care that you didn't scream, didn't faint, didn't run when you woke up next to a stranger. Everyone in this city is afraid of. You stayed calm. That's rarer than you think." His voice dropped further. "You deserve better than the way you just talked about yourself." I didn't have an answer for that. "Not a fast one, anyway. Here's what I can offer," he said, business again, ticking each point off like he'd rehearsed it, or maybe like he'd offered this exact deal to someone else once before. "Protection for as long as this lasts. A salary that will make the agency's pay look like a joke. A place to live. Somewhere no one outside this house can reach you. And whatever medical coverage your brother needs. I know about Noah's tuition, and I can make that problem disappear too, permanently, not just until the semester ends." Noah's name in his mouth was what broke me. Not the danger, not the money. The fact that he already knew what mattered to me. "If I say no, then you walk out of here as a maid who slept in the wrong bed and knows too much about a war she isn't part of. I'd rather you didn't have to find out what that makes you." I thought about rent, about tuition, about a life that had never once handed me an easy option. "Fine," I said, "I'll do it." By the time I got back to the staff quarters to gather my things, my phone had already lit up with 3 messages from a number I didn't recognize. and a headline was circulating in a gossip forum one of the other maids followed. Unknown woman replaces Mafia bride at Moretti estate. Sources say engagement was arranged overnight. Somewhere out there people were already looking at my picture, and not all of them were harmless. The headline was still up when I woke the next morning, in a bedroom 3 times the size of my old apartment, in sheets that probably cost more than my rent. Unknown woman replaces Mafia bride. Someone had already screenshotted my old work badge photo and pasted it next to a picture of the Moretti gates. I turned my phone face down and told myself I'd deal with it later. Later turned out to be the theme of my first week. A woman named Miss A. Alvarez arrived on my second morning with a leather folder and the unhurried patience of someone who had clearly done this before, for someone else, under equally strange circumstances. Posture, she said by way of introduction, and spent the next 4 hours teaching me how to hold a wine glass, how to greet a room full of strangers without looking like I wanted to run from it, and which fork belonged to which course at a table set for 20. She corrected the angle of my chin twice, the set of my shoulders 3 times, and my instinct to apologize every time I got something wrong. At least a dozen. Stop saying sorry, she told me. You are not sorry. You are learning. I've eaten cereal out of a mug for 3 years, I told her. That will not be relevant today, she said, and kept going. The dancing lessons were worse. Adrian's cousin's husband, a stiff, patient man named Marco, spent 2 full afternoons teaching me to waltz without stepping on either of our feet, which I managed roughly 60% of the time. By the 3rd afternoon, Adrian himself showed up instead, rolled his sleeves up, and simply said, "Follow my lead. Stop watching your feet." It worked better than 4 hours with Marco had. I didn't mention that. There were security briefings too. A broad-shouldered man named Dario walking me through exits, panic buttons hidden in 3 different rooms, and the exact tone of voice I should use if I ever needed to signal that something was wrong without saying it out loud. He made me practice it until I could say it without my voice shaking. "You are a target now," he told me flatly, like he was reading a weather report. Act like one that knows it. I didn't love being reminded of that, but I listened anyway, and I found myself scanning rooms without meaning to, the way he'd taught me. Exits first, exits always. What surprised me more than the etiquette or the waltzing was how quickly the house started to feel less like enemy territory. I said good morning to the kitchen staff. I learned the housekeeper's name was Marta, and that her daughter was starting college in the fall. I carried my own coffee cup back to the kitchen instead of leaving it for someone else to collect, which apparently was unheard of in this house because 3 different people commented on it within the same week. "You don't have to do that," Marta told me once, half scandalized. "I know," I said. "I want to." Word travels fast in a house like this. By the end of the 2nd week, staff who'd barely looked at me on day 1 were smiling when I passed. Even Adrian's grandmother, Sophia, I finally learned, after being too intimidated to ask directly, started appearing at breakfast more often than not, watching me with sharp, assessing eyes that had slowly, almost reluctantly, softened into something like approval. "You are kind to people who cannot do anything for you," she told me one morning, stirring her espresso. "That is rare in this family. Rarer in this business." She didn't say anything else, but she didn't need to. Not everyone was thawing. Isabella De Luca had gone quiet after that first morning. Too quiet, according to Dario, who mentioned in passing that her family had been making calls to people they hadn't spoken to in years old. Contacts, old grudges, old alliances that had gone dormant but never really died. He didn't say who, exactly. And I got the sense he didn't fully know either. What he did know was that a woman that publicly humiliated didn't stay quiet out of grace. She stayed quiet because she was planning something, and planning took time she was clearly willing to spend. I didn't know what any of it meant yet. I would. Meanwhile, something was shifting between Adrian and me that I didn't have a tidy name for. It started small. He began appearing at breakfast instead of eating in his office, which Marta told me he almost never used to do. We fell into an easy rhythm of trading sections of the newspaper without discussing it. Some nights, when I couldn't sleep in a house still unfamiliar and too quiet, I'd find him awake too. And we'd end up talking in the kitchen until one of us noticed the time. He never once made me feel foolish for asking questions about his world. When we walked anywhere together, his hand found the small of my back before either of us acknowledged it was happening. Once, crossing the courtyard at night, his fingers laced through mine without either of us commenting on it, like it had already become ordinary. I learned things about him nobody had bothered to mention. A folder left open on his desk one evening showed transfers to 3 children's hospitals across the state, none of them under the Moretti name. When I asked, he shrugged like it embarrassed him. Orphanages too, he admitted eventually, and a scholarship fund. My father thinks it's a liability if it gets out. I think it's the only thing I do that doesn't cost someone something. Why keep it secret? Because everyone already decided who I am, he said. It's easier to let them. I started to understand, slowly and against my will, that the man the tabloids feared and the man who sat across from me at breakfast weren't entirely the same person, even if they lived in the same body. 3 weeks after that first disastrous morning, Adrian and I made our first public appearance together. A charity gala downtown. Cameras waiting at the entrance. My hand tucked into his arm exactly the way Mr. Ibby Alvarez had drilled into me. I'd practiced my smile in the mirror that morning. I hadn't practiced anything for what happened next. We were halfway up the front steps, flashbulbs going. Adrian leaning down to say something in my ear, when I felt him go rigid beside me a half second before I heard the crack of the shot. Adrian moved faster than I could process, turning his body into mine, shoving us both sideways behind a stone pillar as the second shot hit somewhere close enough that I felt the air move. Screaming erupted around us, guests scattering, security shouting into radios, someone's champagne glass shattering against the marble. I felt something warm and sticky against my palm where it had landed on Adrian's side. I looked down, my hand shaking, red spreading fast against his white shirt. Adrian. His knees buckled. And then the world went dark. The world came back in pieces, white light, the smell of antiseptic, a machine beeping somewhere too close to my ear. It took me a long moment to realize the beeping wasn't mine. My whole body felt heavy, weighted down in a way that had nothing to do with injury and everything to do with fear that hadn't finished draining out of me yet. Adrian was in the bed across the room, a bandage wrapped tight around his shoulder, an IV taped to the back of his hand. Alive, awake even, watching me with an expression I couldn't read past, the exhaustion still fogging my brain. "You're okay," he said, before I could ask. "You got shot." My voice cracked on the word. "You got shot because of me. I got shot because someone wants me dead," he said. "You had nothing to do with that." I didn't believe him. Not really. Not with the memory of his knees buckling still fresh enough to make my hands shake. The doctor came in not long after, explained that the bullet had grazed him, missed anything vital by a margin she called lucky, and he called planned. I didn't ask what he meant by that. I didn't want to know how many times he'd survived something like this before. Dario arrived within the hour, grim-faced, with a tablet under his arm and none of his usual flat calm. "It wasn't random," he said, without preamble, dropping into the chair beside my bed. "The shooter knew exactly which entrance you'd use, exactly what time you'd be on the steps. That information was only shared with 6 people." "Which 6? Adrian asked. "Working on it. But someone inside this house sold you out." The words sat heavy in the room. I watched Adrian's jaw tighten, watched him process betrayal the way he seemed to process everything, quietly, calculating, already 3 steps ahead of the rest of us. I felt sick. Somewhere in this house, someone had smiled at me over breakfast while quietly deciding whether Adrian lived or died. It took 2 more days for Dario to bring back a name. And when he did, it wasn't a member of the household staff. "We traced the schedule leak to an outside contractor," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "Someone brought in for event security at the gala. Goes by Ethan Carter." I stopped breathing. The photo in the folder was blurry, taken from a security camera, But I didn't need better resolution to recognize the tilt of that jaw. The particular way he held his shoulders like he was always about to charm someone. Ethan. My Ethan. The man I'd dated for 2 years before he vanished from my life with an excuse about a job opportunity out of state, and never called again, leaving me to spend months wondering what I'd done wrong, what I could have said differently, what version of myself might have been enough to make him stay. You know him, Adrian said, watching my face. We were together, I said, my voice sounding far away even to me. Before all this. Before any of this. Dario's face didn't change, but something in the way he watched me told me there was more. According to our intelligence, Carter has been working for the DeLuca family for over 3 years. Freelance mostly. Recon, access, information. He paused. 3 years, Miss Bennett. 3 years, Miss Bennett. 3 years. We dated for 2 of them. I sat with that number until it rearranged everything I thought I knew about my own life. Every dinner, every quiet night in, every time Ethan had asked casual questions about the wealthy families whose homes I sometimes worked in through the agency. None of it had been an accident. None of it had been love. I'd been a door. He was patiently working his way through. And I hadn't noticed. Because I'd been too busy being grateful someone wanted me at all. I thought about the way he used to comment on my portions at dinner. How I'd laughed it off at the time and only now understood as one more small cruelty designed to keep me exactly where he needed me. Unsure of myself, easy to manage, too grateful to ask questions. He used me, I said out loud, mostly to hear how it sounded. It sounded exactly as bad as it felt. Adrian didn't say anything right away. When he did, his voice had lost its usual careful control. Lily, don't. I pressed my palms against my eyes. Don't say it wasn't my fault. I know logically it wasn't. That doesn't stop me wondering if anyone has ever actually. I couldn't finish it. The question underneath everything. Whether anyone had ever loved me for something other than what I could give them. Ethan had wanted access. The families upstairs wanted a solution to a war. Even Adrian's offer, the one that had put me in this house in the first place, had started as a transaction. Look at me, Adrian said, and something in his tone made me do it. He'd moved to sit on the edge of my bed, close enough now that I could see the tension still in his jaw from Dario's news. What he did to you has nothing to do with what you deserve. You are not a door people walk through to get somewhere else. You say that. Like. Do. I know, because I've spent 3 weeks watching you be kind to people who can't do a single thing for you in return. That's not something you fake for years to run a con. That's just who you are. His hand came up, brushing a strand of hair back from my face, slow and careful, like I might bolt if he moved too fast. For a moment, neither of us moved. His eyes dropped to my mouth, and mine did the same to his, and the distance between us had shrunk to almost nothing when the door slammed open. Sir, Dario, breathless, phone already in his hand. You need to see this. Adrian pulled back, jaw tight, the moment gone as fast as it had arrived. What? We intercepted new communications. The wedding attack, it's not off. We scheduled around the injury, moved the timeline up. But the target list changed. Dario looked at me and I felt my stomach drop before he said another word. They've concluded eliminating you would break Adrian faster than killing him directly. You're the primary target now, Miss Bennett. Not him. I opened my mouth to respond, to ask how, to ask when. And my phone buzzed on the nightstand beside me. A text. Unknown number. My hands were shaking too badly to unlock the screen on the first try. I know you're scared. Don't call the police. I have Noah. If you want your brother back, you'll do exactly what I say. Attached was a photo, grainy but unmistakable. My brother, 16 years old, gagged, tied to a chair in a room I didn't recognize. The message ended with a name I already knew, one I'd once thought I'd loved. Ethan. I didn't remember deciding to stand up. One moment I was staring at my brother's face on a screen, gagged and terrified in some room I couldn't place. And the next I was in the hallway shouting for Dario, my hospital gown forgotten, the IV line still taped to my hand, my bare feet slapping against cold tile. Adrian was already moving, phone against his ear, giving orders in a voice I hadn't heard him use before. Flat, fast, absolute. Trace the number. I want a location in 10 minutes, not 20. He looked at me once, took in whatever was on my face, and didn't argue when I said the only sentence that mattered. I'm coming with you. Lily, that's my brother. My voice didn't shake, even though everything else in me did. You can leave me behind, or I can climb into whatever vehicle you're taking. Those are the only two options. He studied me for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted. Not the reluctant tolerance I expected, but something closer to respect. Stay close to me. Do exactly what I say when I say it. Fine. 2W, just D. Ooh. The location came back in 11 minutes. An abandoned warehouse on the industrial edge of the city. The kind of place that showed up in exactly the stories Dario had warned me about weeks ago, back when all of this had still felt like a hypothetical. Adrian assembled a team faster than I could process. 4 men I recognized from the estate. All of them suddenly unrecognizable in tactical gear. Weapons handled with the ease of long practice. Someone handed me a vest, heavier than I expected. I put it on with hands that had finally started shaking. The warehouse was dark except for a single work light hanging over a chair in the center of the room. Noah was tied to it, gagged, eyes wide with terror when they landed on me. Every instinct I had wanted to run straight to him. I forced myself to stay behind Adrian, exactly as instructed, watching the shadows the way Dario had drilled into me. Ethan stepped out from behind a stack of crates like he'd been waiting for an audience. Lily, he said my name like we were meeting for coffee, not standing in a warehouse where my brother was tied to a chair. You look good. Mafia life agrees with you. Let him go now, Ethan. My voice came out steadier than I felt. In a minute. Ethan's eyes cut to Adrian, appraising, almost amused. You know, I have to give you credit. I spent 3 years trying to find a way into the Moretti operation. Turns out, I just needed to date the right maid. He smiled at me, the same easy smile that used to make my stomach flip, and now just made me sick. You really never suspected a thing, did you? 2 years, Lily. 2 years of pretending to care what happened at your boring little job, memorizing which families you worked for, which houses had which security systems. You made it so easy. Why, I said, would you even bother pretending that long? Because you were patient work worth doing, he said, like it was a compliment. Sweet, lonely, grateful for any attention. You never once asked why I was so interested in your clients. People like you don't ask questions when someone finally pays attention to them. The word should have gutted me. A month ago they might have. Instead I felt something colder settle into place. Not heartbreak, but clarity. You're wrong about one thing, I said. I'm not the same person you left. Adrian's team moved the moment Ethan's attention flicked toward me. 2 of them peeled off toward the crates where a second gunman had been watching from the shadows. And the room erupted into motion. Shouting. A scuffle. The sharp crack of a single shot fired wide. In the chaos, I did the thing no one expected. Least of all myself. I ran, not toward safety, but toward Noah. My fingers were clumsy on the ropes, but I got them loose faster than I thought I could, pulling the gag free, dragging my brother behind an overturned pallet as gunfire echoed somewhere behind us. It's okay, I kept saying, more for myself than him. It's okay, I've got you. By the time I looked up, it was over. Ethan was on his knees, one arm wrenched behind his back. Adrian's forearm braced hard against his throat. For one terrible second, I saw something in Adrian's face that looked like a decision being made. The kind of decision a man in his world might make without a second thought. Adrian. I said his name quietly, Let the police take him. He didn't move at first. Then, slowly, the tension in his shoulders eased, and he shoved Ethan toward Dario instead, who cuffed him with brisk efficiency. He goes to the police, Adrian said, like he was talking himself into it as much as me. Alive, with everything he just confessed to, recorded. I hadn't even realized someone had been recording. Ethan's face went white as it registered. We didn't speak much on the drive back. Noah wrapped in a blanket between us, finally safe enough to fall asleep against my shoulder. It was only later, after Noah had been settled into a guest room with 2 guards outside the door, that Adrian found me in the kitchen, still too wired to sleep. "You didn't wait for me to save him," he said. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation, quiet and genuinely curious. I couldn't. I wrapped my hands around a mug I wasn't actually drinking from. "I know how this is supposed to go. You're the dangerous one. I'm the maid who gets rescued. But I wasn't going to just stand there." "I know." He sat across from me, close enough that our knees almost touched. "That's not what I expected from you, going in. I expected fear." I got. He paused, searching for the word. "Competence. Courage. You didn't need me to make you brave, Lily. You already were." I felt something loosen in my chest, something that had been tight since the moment I first stepped foot in this house. "You mean that?" "I don't say things I don't mean." He reached across the table, his hand covering mine, and for a moment neither of us said anything at all. "Lily, I need to tell you something about what this has become for me. About what you—" Dario's footsteps cut him off, urgent and heavy in the doorway. "Sir, you need to see this now." Adrian's hand tightened briefly around mine before he let go. "What is it?" "The engagement gala. It's confirmed for tomorrow night. The family moved it up. No negotiation, no delay." Dario's face was grim in a way I'd learned to fear, and our people on the ground just confirmed it moments ago. Dario didn't wait for a response. "There are at least 30 unregistered operatives already inside city limits. They're not waiting for tomorrow to start positioning. They're already here. There was no talk of cancelling the gala." I asked once, standing in the doorway of Adrian's office while he studied a floor plan spread across his desk. Red pins marking exits, sightlines, blind corners. "If we cancel," he said without looking up, "they'll know we're afraid and they'll simply attack somewhere else, somewhere we haven't prepared for. Better the fight happens on ground I control." So instead of cancelling, the Moratti estate transformed itself into the most beautiful trap I'd ever seen. By the following evening, the ballroom had become something out of a dream. I wouldn't have known how to imagine on my own. Black and gold everywhere, thousands of white roses arranged in towering columns along the walls, chandeliers doubled by the reflections in floor-to-ceiling mirrors. Candlelight flickered along every table, and somewhere beneath the orchestra I could smell the roses even over the champagne. Sweet and heavy and almost overwhelming. Waitstaff in crisp black moved between clusters of guests in gowns that probably cost more than a year of my old rent, and for a moment I let myself simply stand still and take in the sheer scale of it, the way the whole room seemed to glow gold under the chandeliers. Mess. Alvarez had dressed me in deep emerald silk, my hair swept up the way she'd drilled into me for weeks, and for one strange, suspended moment, looking at my reflection, I almost forgot why any of this was happening. Almost. Under the beauty. The estate had quietly become a fortress. Dario's people were everywhere I looked, once I knew to look. A guest by the east doors who never touched his champagne, a photographer whose camera bag sat a fraction too heavy on his shoulder, servers who moved with a precision that had nothing to do with catering experience. Adrian moved through the crowd like nothing was wrong, shaking hands, laughing at something Sophia said, his hand resting warm and steady at the small of my back. Only I could feel how tense his arm was beneath his jacket. "Stay near me," he murmured, smiling at a passing senator like he'd said nothing at all. "Whatever happens, don't run for the doors. Run for Dario." The first sign came just after 10, when a caterer near the kitchen doors dropped his tray and reached, in the same motion, for something strapped beneath his jacket. Daria's man was on him before the weapon cleared, and the sound of the struggle got swallowed almost instantly by the orchestra. But I saw it. I saw the moment the beautiful night cracked open. It happened all at once after that. The lights along the east wall exploded in a shower of glass and smoke. Not decoration, I realized too late, but a diversion. Screaming erupted. Guests scattered toward exits that Dario's people were already funneling them through with careful, practiced urgency. Hands on shoulders. Voices low and firm even in the panic. Somewhere near the terrace, a second explosion rattled the windows and sent a spray of shattered crystal raining down from the nearest chandelier, and through the chaos I saw men I didn't recognize pulling weapons from beneath tailored jackets, the disguise of expensive suits dissolving into something far more dangerous. Adrian pulled me behind a marble pillar as gunfire opened up across the ballroom. Controlled bursts answered by Moretti security returning fire from positions I hadn't even noticed were positions. A woman in a beaded gown I recognized as one of Adrian's distant cousins suddenly produced a pistol from her clutch and turned it toward Adrian's father, the betrayal Dario had warned us about, finally showing its face. She didn't get a shot off. One of Adrian's men dropped her before she could. I pressed myself against Adrian's side, heart hammering, watching a war I'd only read headlines about happening in real time around me. And then I saw him. A man near the balcony stairs, half hidden behind a floral column. A rifle raised and aimed with steady, patient precision, aimed at Adrian's back, at the exact angle he'd step into if he moved even slightly to return fire. I didn't think. I grabbed Adrian's jacket and shoved with everything I had, throwing us both sideways as the shot cracked out. Pain bloomed hot and sharp along my upper arm, a graze deep enough to make my vision swim. But Adrian was already moving, already returning fire toward the balcony with a precision that ended the threat in 2 shots. Lily. His hands found my face, my shoulders, checking for the source of blood soaking my sleeve. Lily, look at me. I'm okay, I managed, though the room had started to tilt. It's not bad. Go, finish this. He hesitated exactly 1 second before something in his expression hardened into pure focus. He kissed my forehead fast and fierce, and then he was gone, moving through the chaos toward a man across the ballroom. I somehow understood was the one behind all of it, the DeLuca patriarch himself. Cornered now by Moretti guns on every side, his own people already scattering, already understanding they'd lost. I don't know exactly what Adrian said to him. I was too busy being half carried toward a side room by one of Dario's people, my arm throbbing, the adrenaline finally starting to crack. But I heard the room go quiet. I heard, distantly, someone declare a surrender. Terms exchanged in the clipped, formal language of people who had been at war for a decade, and were finally, unbelievably, done. By the time Adrian found me again, the ballroom outside had gone from battlefield to aftermath, security clearing debris medics moving through stunned guests, Sophia directing cleanup with the same commanding energy she'd used to order roses. 2 weeks ago, her floral bathrobe replaced tonight by a black gown that hadn't so much as wrinkled through the chaos. Adrian didn't say anything. He just lifted me carefully into his arms, ignoring my protest that I could walk perfectly well on my own, and carried me out through a side hallway lit gold by the last of the untouched chandeliers. You could have very easily died, he said quietly, his voice rough in a way I hadn't heard before. So could you. I know. His arms tightened around me. I know exactly what almost happened tonight, Lily, to both of us. He carried me the rest of the way to a private sitting room without another word, laid me carefully on a couch while a medic began cleaning the wound on my arm. And while I sat there wincing under the antiseptic, I watched Adrian walk to the desk in the corner, pull open a drawer and remove a folded document I recognized instantly. The contract that had started all of this, the one promising me money and a quiet disappearance once the danger passed. He looked at it for a long, quiet moment, his thumb tracing the edge of the paper like he was memorizing every clause it had ever held over both our lives. Then, without a word to anyone in the room, he tore it cleanly in half. I stared at the torn halves of the contract lying on the desk, and for a moment neither of us said anything. The medic finished wrapping my arm and slipped quietly out of the room, leaving just the two of us and the sound of a house slowly settling back into itself after a war. Distant voices in the hallway, the faint clink of glass being swept up somewhere below the world, resuming its ordinary rhythm as though a battle hadn't just been fought inside it. "What does that mean?" I asked eventually. Adrian didn't answer right away. He looked tired in a way I hadn't seen on him before, the adrenaline finally draining out and leaving something raw underneath. "It means I'll figure out what comes next," he said. "Get some rest, Lily. You earned it tonight." That wasn't an answer, not really, but I was too exhausted to press for one. The following days blurred into a strange, quiet kind of peace. The DeLuca family had surrendered formally, their rival boss dead, or in custody depending on who you asked. The war that had shattered the Moretti name for a decade finally, unbelievably, over. The house exhaled. Staff moved through the halls without the careful tension I'd grown used to, laughing over meals instead of speaking in careful whispers. Even the light through the windows seemed warmer, softer somehow, like the whole estate had been allowed to breathe again after years of holding its breath. I assumed the contract's ending meant my part in all of this was ending too. I started packing on the 5th morning after the gala, folding the emerald gown Miss Alvarez had insisted I keep, gathering the few things that had become mine in this house that was never supposed to be my home. My arm still ached under its bandage, a dull reminder of everything that had happened. Noah found me halfway through, sitting on the edge of the guest bed watching me fold clothes. "You're leaving?" he asked. "The danger's finally over," I said. "The contract said I'd get paid and go somewhere quiet once it was safe. It's safe now." He didn't look convinced, and honestly neither was I. But I kept folding. I didn't get far. Before noon, Marta appeared at my door with a message that Adrian wanted the whole family gathered in the main hall. Immediately. No explanation given. I followed her down, still in yesterday's clothes, my half-packed bag forgotten on the bed. The main hall was already full by the time I arrived. Adrian's father. Sophia, seated in her usual chair like a queen holding court. Advisors, staff, even Dario standing near the doorway with his arms crossed. Everyone's eyes turned toward me as I stepped inside, and I felt suddenly, painfully aware of how out of place I looked in my rumpled clothes among all this quiet formality. Adrian stood at the front of the room, and when he saw me, something in his shoulders eased. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice carrying easily through the hall. "I have 2 announcements." He held up the torn halves of a contract, and a murmur moved through the room. "The first is that this," he said, is void. Not suspended, not renegotiated. Destroyed. He set the pieces down on a nearby table with a deliberateness that felt like punctuation. "There will be no arranged marriage in this family. Not to the DeLucas, not to anyone else. My father or the council decides might be useful. That era is over." His father opened his mouth, then closed it again, watching his son with an expression somewhere between disbelief and reluctant respect. "The second announcement," Adrian said, and now he was looking only at me, "is that there will never be another bride chosen for this family. There will only be Lily, if she'll still have me." The room went silent. I felt every eye shift to me, but for once, it didn't feel like scrutiny. It felt like the room was simply waiting, along with him. "Adrian, let me finish," he said quietly, crossing the room until he stood in front of me, close enough that the rest of the hall seemed to fall away. "I need to say this in front of everyone, because I spent too long letting the world define who you were allowed to be to me. I always thought I was invisible," I said, my voice unsteady, the words coming out before I'd fully decided to say them. "My whole life, too big, too plain, too easy to overlook. Ethan proved I was right to think that. I came into your world assuming I'd always be the placeholder. The maid who got lucky, not the woman anyone actually chose." Adrian's hand came up to cradle my face, gentle in a way that undid something tight in my chest. You were never a placeholder, he said. From the first morning, I woke up next to a stranger who hadn't run, hadn't screamed, who looked at chaos and stayed calm. You were never ordinary to me. You were the first person who made this mansion feel like a home instead of a fortress, not because of what you did, because of who you are. Adrian. He dropped to one knee, right there in front of his entire family, and the room's collective breath seemed to catch at once. No contract, he said. No deal, no money, no pretending. I'm asking you because I love you, Lily Bennett, more honestly than I've loved anything in my life. Marry me. For real this time. I didn't need to think about my answer. Yes, I said, laughing through tears I hadn't noticed starting. Yes, of course. The hall erupted. Sophia was on her feet, clapping, before anyone else moved, tears streaming freely down her face despite her best efforts to look composed. Noah whooped from somewhere near the doorway. Even Adrian's father managed something that might have been a smile. Months later, the Moretti gardens were full of white roses again, but this time for a celebration no one had to survive. Every member of the household staff attended, seated in the front rows. Adrian insisted on, Marta dabbing her eyes through the entire ceremony. Sophia cried openly and without apology, and when the music began, it was Noah, in a suit that still felt strange on his growing frame, who walked me down the aisle toward the man waiting at the end of it. The Moretti empire didn't stop being powerful, or complicated, or occasionally dangerous. Adrian still made calls behind closed doors, still carried the weight of an underworld I was only beginning to understand, but it began building itself on something sturdier than fear. Loyalty, chosen freely, and love that had started with an exhausted maid falling asleep in the wrong bedroom, terrified of getting caught, and became, against every impossible odd, forever. I never did become invisible again. I became instead exactly the woman Adrian had promised his family I was, not a placeholder, but the one he'd chosen, with nothing to gain and nothing left to hide. From a wrong bedroom door to Adrian Moretti's true bride. Lily's story is finished, but ours isn't. If this ending made you tear up, drop a in the comments and tell us which chapter hit you hardest. Like this video if Lily earned every bit of a happy ending, and hit subscribe so you're first to know when the next story drops. Trust us, this next one is even wilder.